Hey, hello, this is Mr. Resumen. Today I'm going to explain a science fiction movie called Lifelike. Spoilers ahead, so heads up, be careful. The movie begins by introducing Sophie and James, a couple who have just gotten married and are starting their life together. As they kiss, James receives a call that his father has died. Since then, James and Sophie moved into his father's luxurious house. Aside from a luxurious house, James also inherited his father's job. On the other hand, Sophie's not at all accustomed to this opulent life of luxury. She strongly resists having any maid serve her, even though the staff continues to work for her quite happily. Sophie still didn't want anyone else besides the two of them, so in the end, she dismissed all the maids in her house, giving them each 2 years of salary. James, who knew this, was initially disappointed with Sophie, because such a large house required a maid to serve her, although James eventually obeyed and accepted what his wife wanted. After that, they felt the heat, leading to a very passionate night. The next day, while James was busy at work, Sophie called him because she needed his help to start the lawn mower. So James went to prepare the machine at night, but he could not turn it back on. Sophie, still unaccustomed to her new life, and James, always busy at work, caused Sophie to begin complaining again, even though she herself had dismissed all of her maids. So after this, James decides to go to a company that develops modern robots that look exactly like humans. The robots are rented out to customers to serve as waiters. At the company, James is going to rent this beautiful robot, but Sophie disagrees because the robot seems too beautiful and perfect to be a servant in their home. Sophie is afraid of becoming jealous. Finally, they both agreed to hire a male robot named Henry to be a maid in their home. At first, there were no problems. Henry, as a robot, prepared breakfast every morning and mowed the lawn as ordered by his owner. One day, as Sophie went to get dressed, she did not expect Henry to be in her room, so she demanded he leave. Sophie, feeling uncomfortable with Henry, began complaining to James while he was very busy with his work, until finally their relationship became less and less close. For that reason, Sophie began to grow closer to Henry. Sophie feels lonely because James is seldom home, so she begins trying to spend more time with Henry whenever she can instead. Sophie tells Henry to read a book containing the various emotions and feelings humans experience. However, she should not give him the book because his artificial intelligence system will learn from it, causing Henry to develop feelings and eventually experience love just like a real human being would. After that, one night Sophie wakes up when she hears something outside her house. She goes out and discovers that Henry is sleeping there without any clothes on. Then, a scene appears where Henry says that he dreams of becoming a human. The following day, James and Sophie, who sensed the peculiar strangeness of Henry the robot, immediately went to meet with Julian, the professional owner of the robot company. Julian said it was because they made Henry's emotions develop too much, and both treat Henry too much like a human. After that, James blamed Sophie for being too close to Henry. She is currently spending the vast majority of her time staying at home with Henry. One night, when James finally arrives back at the house after finishing his long day at work, he discovers a heartfelt letter from Sophie that she had written quite a long time ago, right when they first moved in. James reads the letter and takes the initiative to set up candles in his room to invite Sophie over. For some delicious fun, you catch my drift, right? But unfortunately, Sophie turns him down. The following day, James is very confused about his work, while Sophie is busy talking with Henry. He says that he felt emotions within himself and felt that he was programmed to make Sophie happy. Henry misinterpreted the meaning and tells her he will serve Sophie and James without any restrictions, including doing the horizontal tango together with the two. At this moment, Sophie starts to like Henry. Sophie even fantasizes about spending steamy nights with Henry. When James left for work, Sophie accidentally opened her bedroom door and sighed on the bed, so Henry could clearly hear her delicious little act from outside. When she felt satisfied, Sophie went out and saw Henry, who just stared at her. Sophie also asked Henry to join her for a swim, and it turns out James has not left for work yet. He feels jealous seeing their closeness. James goes to consult with Julian about Henry. Julian explains that Henry's behavior would certainly align with what his owner desires. Therefore, if Sophie happens to like Henry, Henry will like Sophie too. Then James told Henry to stop associating with Sophie, but Henry complained to Sophie, which finally caused James and Sophie to argue again. So Sophie left the house for a few days. Right now, only James and Henry are alone in the house. When James asks Henry for his pocket knife, he comes back without any clothes. Then Henry explains he just wants to make them both happy. When Henry shaved James's beard, Henry suddenly leaned in and kissed James. James, who did not have his fun with Sophie last night, immediately unleashed his lust on Henry, and there was a very intense night of chess. The next day, James did not seem to remember what had happened the night before. He thought it was just a dream, so he went straight to his office. There, James invited Sophie to come home, but Sophie still could not accept him back. It turns out Sophie secretly heads home whenever James goes to work. She only wants to meet up with Henry because she finds him irresistible, and so Sophie gets intimate with Henry behind his back. But when Henry said the words, "I love you," Sophie was immediately surprised because Henry should not be programmed to love his owner. But Henry innocently said that he only wanted to make his owner happy, so he expressed himself by saying, "I love you" to Sophie. At this moment, Henry had crossed the line. When James arrived home, he found Sophie sitting by the fire, and Sophie said that Henry had kissed her. James was disappointed with Sophie, because in reality the robot Henry will do whatever his owner wants, and when Henry kisses Sophie, that is what Sophie wants. James also went over to Henry and punched him, then pulled Henry's bed away so he couldn't get up. The next day, James and Sophie were waiting for Julian to arrive. But since the wait was taking too long, James eventually left for work. Suddenly, Henry shows up and asks Sophie, "Why did you turn off my bed? What's wrong with me?" He also explains that he was programmed only to make James and Sophie happy, which is why he did what his owner wanted him to do. Henry also told Sophie about the intense chess night he had with James. Soon after, Julian arrives at the house, but Sophie has to go see James at his office. At this point, things take a rather strange turn. Henry has bruises on his face after being beaten by James. He shouldn't have such wounds, because let's remember, Henry is actually a robot. Julian also turned toward Henry and ordered him to go to his bed, but Henry had finally come to the realization that Julian had been lying to him throughout this entire time period. Suddenly, the scene shifts back to Sophie, who is furious that James slept with Henry. However, James explains he only did it because she rejected his advances earlier that night. Ultimately, he just took out his frustration on Henry instead. Well, because both were wrong, they finally reconciled. When they arrived home, they were surprised by Henry, who was outside without any clothes. Henry has realized that he is a human all along. Julian has lied to Henry and all the fake robots at his company. Julian adopted and raised them to be robots from childhood into adulthood. Naturally, it is strictly for business. The FBI also sees Julian's company and is evacuating all the humans who were forcibly converted into robots. This is a very serious situation. Julian brainwashed them, requiring more guidance. Later, James, Sophie, and 2 Federal Bureau of Investigation agents returned home to find Henry. Julian immediately shot the 2 Federal Bureau of Investigation agents dead. Julian says that James and Sophie had destroyed the business he had built with his father. He also recounted Henry's origins as a discarded baby with bruises. And finally, he was adopted by Julian to be a fake robot. When he tried to shoot Sophie and James, Henry suddenly appeared and killed Julian. Henry then took a knife and cut his stomach to prove he is human. Dying, Henry apologized to James and Sophie for ruining their home. They replied, "You taught us to love and accept each other's flaws. We love you, Henry. I am so sad, I swear." Eventually, Henry passed away. 5 years later, James and Sophie have aged and now have a son named Henry in his honor. And that is how this incredible movie finally comes to an end. Be sure to subscribe for more videos like this, turn on notifications, and leave a like too to help support the channel. Thanks so much for watching.